Let's see here. See better like that or like this? Let's see. I think did we finish the respiratory system last time?
No.
Almost. Almost. Let's see.
The termination of the respiratory.
Oh, yeah. Right here. There it is. Okay. Let me get this out of here.
You have a lot of students.
Yeah. Good morning, everybody. Gosh, I guess it's time to get started. It's 11 o'clock, actually 1 minute after. Today's Thursday, April 15th, 2021. And Tuesday, so where were you guys? You weren't, everybody was going, that was my fault. You know, I have every day I have several Zoom meetings, and I've recorded since we started all, you know, probably over 200 Zoom meetings, you know, and this has never happened to me before. Tuesday, I clicked on the wrong meeting. So I was Zooming in my biology class, an empty biology class. There were no anatomy students in there. And all my anatomy students, you guys out there in Zoom land, were waiting for the meeting to start that was never started. But I was Zooming, but in a different link. I screwed up. So, but it is recorded. Tuesday's lecture is recorded. And I uploaded it to my courses. So it's there. So I'm sorry you missed it live, but you can at least see it recorded. That's kind of a good thing, I guess. So anyway, let's see where, according to my sources I have here today, this is where we left off last time. The termination of the respiratory tree, where it all comes to an end, right? Is this right? Are you sure? She gave me a thumbs up, so that's right. So the termination, the respiratory tree terminates as the smallest bronchioles. Remember, we had primary, secondary, tertiary, remember all that, and then it finally comes down to the bronchioles, and the bronchioles give way to alveolar ducts. And of course, the alveolar ducts, they expand to the alveoli. So here, each alveolar duct expands to form an alveolar sac. You see 1, 2, 3 sacs here, which are hollow in the air cavity that itself in each of these hollow sacs is often referred to as an atrium. And it is built of and surrounded by these individual little tiny air sacs, the alveoli. So the alveolar sacs are made out of alveoli. And that's where it all comes to an end. Each of the alveoli, the word alveolus means grape. So alveoli means grapes. So don't they look kind of like little grapes all clustered right there? I define them as hollow clusters of simple squamous epithelium covered with a pulmonary or alveolar capillaries, forming the respiratory membrane for gas exchange between the atmosphere and the blood. Remember, that form of respiration between the atmosphere and the blood is external respiration. So this is where external respiration takes place. Remember that? I don't need this today. an internal respiration, external respiration. So in the atrium, that space right there, that air that's in there, that's the same as the air that's out around you. So that's the outside world, technically, right here in this space. And this membrane right here is the respiratory membrane where atmospheric gas diffuses into the blood. And so there's your external respiration. All right. So that was the passages, the branches of the respiratory tree. Okay. Now we looked at the tree. Now let's back away from the tree. Now you have that expression, see the forest for the trees. Sometimes you got to back away so you can see the whole forest. So here we're going to look at the whole forest in the form of the lungs. Look at the gross anatomy of the lungs. You know, we look at the passageways in the lungs. Now you look at the entire lungs, the gross anatomy of the lungs. So what are the lungs? Here I tell you the lungs are paired respiratory organs within the thoracic cavity, separated by the heart and the mediastinum. So you see this is, of course, the right lung, the left lung, the space right here. You can almost visualize the heart being situated right here. Remember, that's the pericardial cavity, and each of these are contained in right and left pleural cavities. And then this space right here above the heart, there's other things in there besides the trachea, the esophagus and the thymus gland and so on and so forth. This is not really a body cavity, but that space or position is usually identified as the mediastinum. That's the space directly behind the manubrium of the sternum, you know, because your breastbone would occur like right about here, and so that space right behind it's mediastinum. So that's just some little terminology from way back when. Okay, histologically, the lungs, you know, you have a stroma. The stroma consists of elastic connective tissue for expansion and control. Remember, we have the terms stroma and parenchyma. Remember I told you about that? I said parenchyma is the functional tissue of organs, and the stroma, well, you think you're functional, you must have non-functional. Well, stroma is not non-functional. Of course, it has a function, but it functions in support or other necessary functions other than, in this case, respiration, because elastic connective tissue has nothing to do with gas exchange, specifically gas exchange. That's like a supportive tissue, the stroma. And here, you know, it expands and contracts and so forth. So that's part of the stroma. And of course, if you look at the gross anatomy of the right and left lung, they're different, okay? And this is pretty consistent. Well, it is consistent in human anatomy. Not all mammals are like this, but humans are typically like this, where the right lung, this one right here, is divided into 3 lobes. And the names of the lobes are pretty easy. You know, you have a right superior lobe, a right middle lobe, and a right inferior lobe. That's it, okay? And then the lobes themselves are separated by pulmonary fissures, all right? There's a horizontal fissure right here. You have one horizontal fissure that separates the right lobe from the middle lobe. And then there's a right oblique fissure. The right oblique fissure, because oblique, see how it's kind of going at an angle, separates the middle lobe from the inferior lobe. That's in the right lung. The left lung, I said, like, is different. There's in the human left lung, there's only 2 lobes, a superior lobe and an inferior lobe. And both lobes are separated by a left oblique fissure. So there's 2 oblique fissures, a right one and a left one, and 1 horizontal fissure that's in the right lung, okay? Another noteworthy feature associated with the left lung is the cardiac notch, or sometimes called cardiac impression, that you see in the superior lobe, the left superior lobe. And that's to accommodate the apex of the heart. You know, remember the shape of the heart has a base and an apex? Well, the apex, the pointed part, It doesn't point straight down. It kind of points to the left. And so it's kind of like notched out right there. You don't have anything like that in the right lung. So it's still, it's supposed to be there to accommodate the heart. So that's that. Now, two lungs. Lungs are divided into lobes, and then in turn, the lobes are divided into bronchopulmonary segments, all right? And so this is illustrating the bronchopulmonary segments. Each pulmonary lobe is divided into smaller compartments of lung tissue by connective tissue septa. So this is all color-coded, but each one of these bronchopulmonary segments is like a separate little entity. It can be separated as the boundaries, connective tissue boundaries that divide it. Each bronchopulmonary segment is supplied with its own artery, its own vein, and its own segmental or tertiary bronchus. Remember that? You have primary, secondary, tertiary, fourth order, fifth order, et cetera, et cetera. Well, you have two primary, one to each lung, 5 lobar, one to each lobe. Remember, you got 3 on the right, 2 on the left. And then there are 18 tertiary, because you have 18 bronchopulmonary segments, all right? The right superior lobe is divided into 3 segments. They all have names. I'm going to spare you the names. Just know that each lobe has so many segments, right? And it adds up to be 18 total. But there's 10 in the right lung. There's 3 in the right superior lobe. There's 2 in the middle lobe. And then there's 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in the right inferior lobe. And then if you look at the left lobe, it's 4 and 4. The superior lobe has 4 segments, and the left inferior lobe also has 4 segments. There's 2 less because the superior lobe and inferior lobe have some lobes that fuse together. You can see right here, 1 and 2 are fused. In the back here, 7 and 8 are fused, but that's not important. But what I want you to know is that each lobe is divided into segments, 18 total. How about that? The end. So that's the respiratory system. How about that? You guys have any questions about any of that? So we're done with that. And so today, we get to start the urinary system, right? And so let me open that up. And find that. Let me browse in here. And that's going to be number 11, urinary system. We have 13 totals, 11 and 12 and then 13. And this is kind of like the respiratory, because it's kind of a little short one, short and sweet. It's not real complicated. At least I didn't make it that complicated. The physiology of the urinary system is a little bit more involved. I don't really get into it that much in here, but there's some anatomy you need to understand before you get into the phys, and so that's what I address. And so the urinary system, I think I'm gonna have to change the display here in a sec. Yep, there we go. What is the urinary system? Well, the urinary system is the system associated with the production, the storage, and elimination of urine. You make urine, you store urine, and you eliminate urine, and you've got anatomical structures associated with each, all right? And so here I list all the organs of the system, and it's pretty straightforward. You got paired kidneys, you got paired ureters, an unpaired urinary bladder, and a urethra. Okay, we're all done. That's it. It's funny, wasn't it? No, and we'll talk about all these. This is just like one slide to kind of list everything. We'll start by talking about the gross anatomy of the kidneys. Can I tell you that they occur in the posterior abdominal wall between T12 and L1, right about that position. If you look, they're not completely symmetrical. The right kidney is slightly lower than the left. You see that's kind of scooched down a little bit. It's probably like that due to the shape of the liver that's up here. If you imagine the liver has been removed, so you can see the kidneys. remember the kidneys are retroperitoneal. Remember, they're behind the peritoneum. So if you put the peritoneum in place and had the peritoneal cavity, you'd have a huge right lobe of the liver here, and the left lobe's right about here, and it kind of shifts everything down on that side. But anyway, that's normal. How big are the kidneys? The shape and size of kidneys varies a little bit from one, well, actually a lot. I mean, you look like all kinds of animals, but even within mammals, it's different. But the human kidney is not really big. I say, oh, it's about the size of a bar of soap. It's about 12 centimeters high, 6 centimeters wide, and not real thick, only about 3 centimeters thick. So it's kind of a well-used bar of soap, kind of a thin bar of soap. It has a convex surface laterally, you see on both sides, and then a concave surface medially. And there's that word hilum or hilus. Remember, we talked about the lung has a hilum or a hilus. A lot of organs have a hilum or a hilus. This is just two different spellings. I mean, one of them is probably a corruption of the other. I'm not sure. But it means the same thing. It's like an indentation, a convex portion. In anatomy, the hilum of an organ or hilus is usually where structures are entering or exiting. And so it's a busy little place right here where you can see blood vessels entering and exiting, and of course the ureters coming out. And so that they are always facing medially. Okay, just trying to get your topography and your directions down. That's normal. And you look at it, it kind of looks like a bean, like a kidney bean. It's making you hungry for red beans and rice? It is. What came first, the bean or the organ? Kidney bean or the kidney the organ? What do you think? I don't know. Is this a chicken or an egg thing? Or maybe it is. I don't know. I don't know. I'm probably, maybe the organ. I'm thinking maybe the organ first, and then the beans, they look like little kidneys. I don't know. Maybe they looked at the organ and said, hey, look, there's a giant kidney bean. The kidney, well, I think the word kidney actually, the word has to deal with urine. So maybe the organ first and then they name the bean after the, wow. Maybe you can do some research and think about that. Something else that's associated with the kidney, but really has nothing to do with the function of the kidney, or the adrenal glands. And this is pretty true for all organisms, all animals, at least all mammals. That you have the adrenal glands, or sometimes spelled suprarenal. See, look at the word adrenal. Renal means kidney, adrenal means like a pond. Or suprarenal. Anytime you see renal, it's kidney. So this means upon the kidney. There's two different ways to say upon the kidney. It looks like a blob of like butter or something just clumped up there. The adrenal glands don't have a very defined shape, at least not in humans. It's kind of blob sitting up there. And of course, it's part of the endocrine system. And in physiology, you'll learn about adrenal cortex, adrenal medulla, and the functions of the different hormones that they produce and so forth. But they develop there's three organs that kind of develop from the same embryological primordia. The adrenal glands, the kidneys, and the gonads all kind of are related. And of course, the gonads are displaced, but the kidneys and the adrenal glands are kind of stay in the same neighborhood. So anyway, there they are. That's where they'd be all retroperitoneal. Like I said, right here, all structures, the kidneys, the adrenal glands, the ureters, remember, all defined retroperitoneal, and this is a good view. You can see the peritoneal cavity in here, and then there's the dorsal peritoneum right there, and then of course here's the kidneys, and this section here is a horizontal section through the torso. Okay, there's that word again, stroma. Remember stroma versus parenchyma? The kidney stroma, there are three supporting tissues that make up the kidney stroma. First, the renal fascia, which is the outer fibrous connective tissue, which is continuous with the peritoneum. Where do they label it? Or do they? I can't, maybe I should put my glasses back on. But here's your peritoneum, this outer membrane. Yeah, right here, renal fascia, right here. Outer line right there. It kind of encapsulates the kidney. And then deep to that is a adipose capsule. Remember when we were talking about functions of adipose connective tissue? Remember I said it's food supply, thermal regulation, and I also said mechanical insulation. They insulate against mechanical trauma, and that's what the adipose capsule, the renal adipose capsule, is doing here. It surrounds the outside of the kidney, kind of packs it in fat and cushions it against mechanical trauma. And of course, you can see, fat. And then in my lab, we would see as like a place that we would look to view adipose connective tissue in the adipose capsule associated with the kidney. And then the surface of the kidney itself has a renal capsule. It's like the line that's on the very, very outer margin. These are all protective layers, so to speak. The renal capsule is a thin fibrous sac adhered to the surface of the kidney, allows the kidney to be impermeable barrier to infectious agents. So it keeps things from getting into the kidney, and it helps keep things in the kidney, keeps things from getting out of the kidney. And that's another reason why the kidneys are positioned where they are. Because look what's positioned over here. This is your peritoneal cavity. This is the kitchen. This is the outhouse. So you don't want the septic system too close to the kitchen. One of them you're preparing food, one of them you're preparing disposing of waste. Okay, this is not metabolized waste like fecal material. No, this is the stuff that's got into the blood. All right, remember we were absorbing nutrients and other garbage that's in there. Well, when you metabolize proteins, proteins are made out of amino acids. Amino acids contain nitrogenous products, and so you produce nitrogenous wastes. And this is, you get into physiology when you talk about nitrogenous waste and disposal of those. And that's what the kidney is doing. The significant ingredient or constituent or component of urine is various forms of nitrogenous waste: urea, uric acid, and ammonia. Okay, and those are all, particularly ammonia is deadly, and of course you got to get rid of it, and that's all handled by your kidneys, far separated from your kitchen. Okay, all right. So that's the stroma, the protective tissue, structural stuff on the outside. The renal parenchyma, this is the functional stuff that's in the kidney. And this is a god-awful looking kidney taken from a cadaver. Doesn't it look terrible? Not a well-preserved cadaver either. And this was, I think, taken from your book. And I I think I've included this so you can appreciate our models and our images that we use to teach with, because if you didn't have those models and images, you would try to figure out something by looking at this kind of, it looks terrible, So this is the kidney. It's like what a real kidney, but it's not a fresh kidney, it's a preserved kidney. But anyway, the parenchyma. Functional tissues of the kidney is the parenchyma. There's a C-shaped glandular tissue which forms the urine, and it's conveyed. The concave portion of the parenchyma forms the renal sinus. So it looks like a C. You remove all this stuff on the inside, that's not part of the parenchyma. The actual functional part is all this tissue out here, okay? This is part of the duct work and blood supply. So if you could remove that, it would look just kind of like a C. All right, that's the kidney, the renal parenchyma. The parenchyma has different portions. There's zones of it, the zones of the parenchyma. The outermost portion is called the renal cortex. The word cortex, we use that a lot in anatomy, in biology in general. It refers to a superficial or an outer layer. Now, in a fresh kidney, it would be thin and kind of pink looking on the outside, which you can't really see in this. But the parenchyma deep to that forms the medulla, which medulla means middle. So you have a cortical area or a cortex and a medulla. And the medulla is made up of different structures all together here, and it looks different in a fresh kidney. Here I say it's a thick inner reddish brown layer adjacent to the sinus. The sinus, of course, that's the part of the C, the concave part of the C. Medullary tissue forms cone-shaped structures called renal pyramids. They're hard to make out, but you get each pyramid is that what gives it that reddish brown look. And they're shaped like a little pyramid, like little cones, right? The portion of the conical or cortical tissue between the pyramids forms the renal columns. And so it's not pure medulla, it's not pure pyramids, I guess I should say, but there are portions of the cortical tissue that dips down between the pyramids. And so that cortical tissue that's between the pyramids, that's what forms the renal columns. And so here I put a little formula together to explain what a renal lobe is. A renal lobe, is the pyramid plus the columns, or plus the cortex makes the lobe. And that's really, they point out stuff, and this explanation is, yeah, I kind of get it, but it never really drives it home until you have a nice not animated, but artist or rendition, graphic or illustration like this, or a model. Here it looks more like I explained, where you've got cortex out here, then these reddish brown little cones, those are the pyramids, right? It's pyramid, pyramid, pyramid. And then you see where part of the cortex dips down between the pyramids. See that? Those are the columns. And so a lobe would be the pyramid plus the column. So all this, like this little region right here would be one lobe, this would be another lobe, et cetera, et cetera. That's it. Now, kidney drainage. We're talking about the route that urine would take. Urine production, actually making of urine, takes place up here in the cortex, but it's drained into these pyramids. The pyramids are an arrangement of collecting tubules that are collecting the urine. So the urine is produced up here at the base of the pyramids and is drained to the tips of these pyramids. And then of course it's gonna eventually head into the ureter, to the bladder, and then to the urethra. Okay, and so we're gonna talk about that, get all of our ducks in a row. So here, I tell you, the renal pyramids are formed from collecting ducts which receive newly formed urine. The drainage occurs from the base to the apex of the pyramid. The apex of the pyramid, the tip of the pyramid, is known as a renal papilla. Papilla means something nipple shaped, and I guess it kind of looks like a little nipple in the sense that a nipple is like where milk comes out of a lactating nipple. Well, here a renal papilla, that's where urine is coming out. So urine is always being formed because it's basically you're filtering blood. As long as your blood is flowing, it's in the kidney, it's being filtered and you're producing urine. The rate at which urine is produced varies, depending on your body's hydrology, but you're always going to have urine dripping out of these renal papillae. Like I said, a slow drip or a fast drip or whatever, but drip, drip, drip coming out of these renal papillae. All right. Now, surrounding each papilla is a minor calyx. See that? C-A-L-Y-X. Calyx is singular. Plural is calyces. All right. The word calyx means cup. Like this is a cup. This is a coffee cup. But you go to the doctor's office and a nurse hands you a cup. What do you think you're gonna have to do with that cup? You have to pee in it. Yeah, it's a pee cup. Calyx. I wonder if she calls it a calyx. No, but the calyces, a minor calyx, it surrounds each of the papillae, collecting the urine that's dripping out of the papillae. So here's a minor calyx, minor calyx, minor calyx. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in this view, in this illustration, 6 pyramids. Each pyramid has a papilla. Each papilla is surrounded by a minor calyx. Most human kidneys have about 8 pyramids total, but they're all, the orientation of them varies. You know, here they're all in the same plane, they have them drawn, but realistically, they could be in different planes, but they're all aimed towards the sinus. Okay, but anyway, so minor calyces collect the urine from the papillae. So this is the initial site of urine collection. All right. Now, you have major calyces. A major calyx is the union of two to three minor calyces. So you kind of see where these three kind of merge right here. And then these two kind of come together right here. So where 2 or more minor calyces come together, you form a major calyx. So this would be a major calyx here, and this would be a major calyx here. All right. And then all the major calyces unite in a common chamber called the renal pelvis. So this center area right here, where all the calyces are coming in, that's the renal pelvis. So union of all the major calyces within the renal sinus. That's another reason why I'm defining this. So I can define this again. There's a difference between the renal sinus and the renal pelvis. A lot of times students will confuse those two. The renal pelvis is part of the urine collection. The renal sinus is that concaved portion in the back, that space, you know, of the renal parenchyma. The space right there. I'm going to orient it like your illustration here. This is the sinus, and in the sinus is the pelvis. Does that make sense? Okay. Then the ureter. The pelvis gives way to the ureter. You see that? So here the ureter drainage the renal pelvis to the exterior of the kidney is directed to the urinary bladder. So the ureter occurs between the bladder and the renal pelvis. Okay. So think about this. If you are a drop of urine, what's the path that you would take? Think about everything. You'd start off at the minor calyx, major calyx, renal pelvis, ureter, bladder, and then urethra. Those are your 5, 6. How many is that? 7. Or wait, I forgot how I was counting. Let's count again. I don't know how to count with my fingers. Minor calyx, major calyx, renal pelvis, ureter, bladder, urethra. That's 6. Okay. That's the correct route of urine. If you're a little drop of urine, okay. Make sure you get all that right. And of course, what comes after the urethra? Ureter, urethra, ureter, bladder, urethra, and then what? Nothing. Toilet, she says. Yeah, that's right. Or fire hydrant or tree or whatever. Parking lot. Whatever. Okay. The nephron. What's the nephron? Neph, the prefix there, neph, N-E-P-H-R, P-H, neph, means kidney. Nephron means little kidney. And so this is technically the little functional units of the kidney. And so here, that's how I define it. The nephron is the functional unit of the kidney. One nephron would be. But you have many nephrons per kidney. I tell you right here, there are microscopic structures within the renal cortex, about 1.2 million nephrons per kidney. Now I want you to understand what you're looking at here. This is a close-up of the base of a pyramid. This is one of those pyramids. This is the base of it. So this is like the medulla. And then beyond the base of the pyramid is the cortex. Let me back up just a second just to show you this again. And this is all cortex right here, all right? Here's the base of the pyramid right in here. So this is, medulla, which is mostly pyramids, but there is some cortical tissue between it. But up here is just all cortical tissue. Then if you look at this, zoomed in big time. This is like where all the collecting ducts would be in the medulla. And then this structure here and this structure here, those are the nephrons, 2 of the 1.2 million nephrons. All right, the principal portions of the nephrons include the 3 main things. There's blood vessels, there's a renal corpuscle, that's this kind of round looking thing here and here. And then there are renal tubules, all the golden looking, duct looking things are all tubules. So you gotta have 3 things. All blood vessels here, those are all capillaries everywhere. And then this round structure here, what's the corpuscle, and then the tubules. And then we'll talk about all that. Now, the nephron and blood supply to the kidney. Because remember, it's all about treating the blood. And so we're gonna talk about the blood to the kidney and blood from the kidney. And where do you start? Well, let's start at the abdominal aorta. Of course, you don't see the abdominal aorta here, but it would be positioned on this side right here. Remember branches, you had paired branches and unpaired branches of the abdominal aorta. Well, I think the first paired branches I talked about were the renal arteries. And so coming off, you have a right and left renal artery, okay, that enters the kidneys by the renal hilus or kidney hilus right there. So here's one right here, blood coming in. Once the blood enters the hilus or sinus, you could be, the renal artery splits, divides into lobar arteries. And each lobar artery is going toward a lobe, a renal lobe of the kidney. And remember what a renal lobe was the pyramid and the columns, the cortical tissue and the medullary tissue. And so you see a little red branch heading towards the tip of a pyramid. It's a lobar artery. Once it reaches basically the apex of the pyramid where the papilla and minor calyx meet, it splits and it divides and travels in the renal columns. So the red one here, red one here, red one here, everywhere. They're on the sides of the pyramids. You have interlobar arteries. So the interlobar arteries occur between the pyramids and the renal columns, okay? So they go down to the base of the pyramid here, and they kind of meet up. The sides meet up with each other down the base, and that forms the arcuate artery. The red one at the base here, each base of the pyramid, excuse me, has an arcuate artery, okay? This position is often referred to as the cortical medullary junction. Look at this, that's kind of a big scary looking word, but it's not that bad. Cortical for cortex, medullary for medulla. It basically means where the cortex and medulla meet, okay? That's what's going on. That's where the cortex and medulla meet, and that's where the arcuate artery is found. The word arcuate means to bow. Like a bow and arrow. You see how it's kind of bent, bowing around the base of the pyramid? That's that. Now, if you look closely At the arcuate artery, you see little branches coming off and going up into the cortex. Those are interlobular arteries. Now listen, be careful. Do not confuse interlobular with interlobar. Interlobar are these big ones in the columns. Interlobular are the little branches of the arcuate arteries up here in the cortex. Okay. Now, you with me? Keep that in mind. Next slide, I'm going to zoom in right here at the corticomedullary junction. Zoom, bam, here we are. There's the arcuate artery right there. And then there's the interlobular artery coming up. Interlobular artery coming up. As you can see, there are branches coming off of the interlobular artery. The little branches are known as afferent arterioles. So these they're nipped off, a little nip, 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 nip right there. But this one's not nipped off. It's going up and going to the corpuscle. This one too. This is nipped off, going to a corpuscle. Okay. Those are afferent. Remember that word afferent means toward, carrying blood toward the corpuscle of the nephron. All right. What's it doing there? Well, what do arterioles do? Arterioles are blood supply to a capillary bed. So that's what you expect to see. From the afferent arteriole, you enter the corpuscle as a capillary bed known as the glomerulus. See, glomerulus. Remember, we looked at this in histology in the kidney. We wanted to look at simple squamous epithelium. Remember, all capillaries, doesn't matter where they are, what they're doing, what they're shaped like, what they're called, but a capillary, it's always made out of simple squamous epithelium. And so we looked at glomeruli in the kidney to look at that. And so there it is. The glomeruli are located inside the corpuscles, the capillaries of the nephron, right there. There it is. And they call it a glomerulus because it's shaped like a little ball, like a little globe. See, cute little ball right there, and there's another one right there. That's it. This is the initial site of filtration where blood is initially filtered to collect the waste products that are in the blood. Okay, so there's your glomerulus. Now, that's blood to that capillary. Now you got a blood from that capillary. Well, here I have efferent arteriole. What's afferent means? It means toward. Efferent means away from. But it's another arteriole. This is kind of strange. How do you go from arterial to arterial? Well, we call the vessel coming out of the corpuscle an arteriole because it's technically a portal vessel, because it's sending blood to another capillary bed, either here or here or here. See how this works? This is another capillary bed. It's a capillary bed, efferent arteriole, capillary bed. Capillary bed, efferent arteriole bed, a capillary bed. See that? So here I tell you, efferent arteriole, it's a drainage of the glomerulus, a portal vessel. Remember what portal vessels are between capillary beds? It's supplying to blood of one or two different capillaries, either a peritubular capillary, that's this one, or a vasa recta, that's what these are. And they're different. Now, I think I tell you the differences. In the peritubular capillaries, these guys up here, they surround the renal tubules of the cortical nephrons. This is a cortical nephron because it's up in the cortex, get it? And these peritubular capillaries are drained by interlobular vein. Okay, so here's an interlobular vein right next to the interlobular artery. So these are drained into that. Now, the vasa recta, which means straight vessel, because they're going parallel with these portions of the nephron, which are called nephron loops. So the vasa recta, these guys surround the nephron loop, or sometimes it's called the loop of Henle. That's the old eponym. Henle is somebody's name. These are in the juxtamedullary nephrons. That's these way down here. They're next to the base of the pyramid, are called juxtamedullary, which means literally next to the medulla. And they drain by the arcuate veins. So these vasorecta, you can see, they tap directly into the arcuate vein. The cortical nephrons, the peritubular capillaries drain into the the interlobular veins first, and then the interlobular veins drain into the cortical, the arcuate veins. So that makes you see the difference. See, these tap directly in. These, of course, have to travel by the interlobular veins. But once you're in the arcuate veins, it's basically you're running in reverse. So here I have drainage beyond the arcuate vein includes the interlobular veins here in the columns, and then they drain into the lobular veins, which merge to form the renal veins, and of course the renal veins dump into the inferior vena cava. And you should know the route after that. Remember, inferior vena cava goes all the way up to the right atrium, left, right atrium, right ventricle, to the pulmonary trunk. Remember that. You should know the route of blood all around the body. How about that? So that's blood supply to the kidney. Now, let's back up and look at the structure of the renal corpuscle itself. So here's afferent arteriole carrying blood in. You can kind of see the glomerulus in the background, but it's covered up with some tissue. There's the efferent arteriole carrying blood out. And so what's this thing made out of? Well, here, give you a background. The renal corpuscle, the old school term, it's still in use, is called the Malpighian corpuscle. We had that term before, right? Remember Malpighian layer, the stratum Malpighii. What part of the body was that? You remember? Or what? You know, she's shrugged her. I don't know. I don't know. The Malpighian. I guess that's his Malpighi. Sounds like a character on the Muppets or something. Malpighi. No, it's early biologist. A lot of things are a lot of stuff is named after him. The Malpighian layer, the stratum Malpighii, is part of the living layer of the skin. Okay, honoring this guy, and then this structure in the kidney is named after him too, or we call it just renal corpuscle. A corpuscle. It's a strange kind of archaic term in itself. Corpuscle means like little body, or sometimes it's referred to like a little muscle or little entity of some sort, corpuscle. But renal corpuscle is this whole little round structure in the kidney. It has two main parts. It's the glomerulus, which is the capillary, and then Bowman's capsule. That's another eponym, or sometimes it's called the nephron capsule, if you don't want to use an eponym. But most people still use this. I do anyway. Bowman's capsule or the nephron capsule, or here they call it a glomerular capsule. Okay, but that's two main parts. The Bowman's capsule or the glomerular capsule serves as the filtering chamber of the nephron by surrounding the glomerulus, receiving the filtrate. See, it's kind of like all the yellow cells, and then you got these yellow cells on the glomerulus, okay? And so you get a glomerulus, and it's surrounded by this kind of capsule, all right? Structures of the capsule, so you kind of understand what's going on here. There's two layers, you know, your parietal layer. Remember the terms parietal versus visceral? Well, the parietal layer, this is the outer layer here. It forms the outer wall, so to speak. It's simple squamous epithelium forming the outer wall of the capsule. And then the visceral layer, that's this layer that's actually on the surface of the glomerulus, okay, the actual capillary. Okay. Kind of remember that image of the respiratory membrane. Remember the alveoli, the lungs. The alveoli had the air sacs, but it had a capillary bed on top of it. Same kind of arrangement here. Here you got a capillary bed, but then you got these cells on top of it. The cells are called podocytes. That's what you're looking at. You're looking at a bunch of little podocytes. Or podo like means like his feet. I mean, foot cells. They look like little feet on them. But what they really look like, to me, they kind of look like jigsaw puzzle pieces. But you know, a jigsaw puzzle, you put it together, you know, get like a picture of something. And you know, you got all these little pieces, you know, the very distinct shape of the jigsaw puzzle pieces. And you ever working on a jigsaw puzzle? Remember the first time you worked on a jigsaw puzzle when you were a little kid? You do that? And you go, oh, this piece goes with this piece. It goes together. And it doesn't go together for some reason. I know it goes together, but you can't force them together if they don't go together. But your little kid, I know, you force them together, yeah, it kind of fits. And if it doesn't kind of fit, you got kind of like a spaces in them. You know what I'm saying? To me, that's what the podocytes are. They're like ill-fitted jigsaw puzzle pieces because you got these little spaces, these little gaps where the podocytes link together, and those spaces are there for a reason. They're called filtration slits, because remember, the capillary is going to be leaky. It's going to basically leak out all the aqueous part of the blood, but retain all the blood cells. And so it's like a sieve, like a what do you call it? A colander, a filter. What do you call it? A strainer. It depends on what part of the country you're from. I think Yankees call it strainers. Down here, I think they call them colanders. You call it a colander? You ever heard of that colander? Or strainer or sieve or whatever. That's kind of what it is. But you have these filtration slits, and coming through those slits, you say, oh, that's urine. No, it's not urine yet. At this point, see these yellow arrows? That's showing you the direction of the filtrate. So this material that's produced in the Bowman's capsule or the glomerular capsule is filtrate. And then the filtrate is going to be piped away from the glomerulus by a renal tubule, okay? And so here I have the capsular space, just the space between the visceral and parietal layers. That's where the site of filtration collection. And it, like I said, this space is continuous with the lumen of the renal tubules. So we move on to the renal tubules. The renal tubules, continuous with Bowman's capsules, occurs in 3 segments. So we identify 3 portions of the renal tubules. First, here's your corpuscle. All right, and here's another corpuscle, 2 separate neurons. Attached to each corpuscle is a proximal convoluted tubule, or a PCT. Of course, convoluted means highly folded, right? It's bent. It looks like just a tangled mess, but it's proximal, closer to the corpuscle, all right? And here's a kind of a schematic of it. Here's the corpuscle. Here's the glomerulus collection site, whatever. This area right here, this would be the region of the proximal convoluted tubule right here, the PCT, right about in this area. What does it do? Well, it's at the proximal convoluted tubule where you have solutes in the filtrate are reabsorbed into the blood from the filtrate. Because right here, when the filtrate is initially produced through those filtration slits, it's not very selective. It's just kind of like everything is kind of filtered out, okay? Good stuff and bad stuff. Well, if there's stuff that's in the blood that you want to recover, that takes place in the proximal convoluted tubule, like almost immediately. You got to get the those solute particles, the things that are dissolved in the blood, back into the blood from the filtrate. Does that make sense? So you see the arrows are going back into the blood. So stuff comes out of the blood, then it goes back into the blood in the at the proximal convoluted tubule. Okay, so that's what that is. Does that up here, and then all of a sudden, look, it straightens out like this, forms this little hairpin looking deal. See that on both sides? That's the loop of Henle. Another real common eponym that everybody kind of still uses, but if you don't want to call it by somebody's name, you can call it the nephron loop. Some kind of loop, this is what we're talking about. Now, in the loop of Henle, or the nephron loop, this is where waste products are actively secreted into the filtrate from the blood. Now, this is a key buzzword in physiology right here. See the word actively? Anytime you hear the word actively or active, like active transport, active, that means it translates as requires energy for it to happen. What's happening up here in the corpuscle is passive transport versus active transport. Passive transport does not require any energy. Okay, active transport requires energy. It requires ATP. Okay, and so why is that? Well, remember you've got passive filtration that takes place up here, because there's material in the blood that can be easily just kind of filtered out, you know. But if you have larger waste product molecules that can't fit through the filtration slits, they have to be kind of forced in there with energy. So active transport. And that's what's taking place in the loop of Henle. Active transport of waste products. So you got secretion. It's requiring energy to go back. So this right about here is where you'd have the loop of Henle. All right. Now, after the loop, you have descending and ascending loops, and it comes back and it starts getting coiled again. See the coil right here, and then comes up and gets a little coil right here. That's the distal convoluted tubule. Distal, like further away, further downstream. The distal convoluted tubule is where water is reabsorbed from the filtrate back into the blood. So here's the last part. They don't show you this right here, but you'd have another arrow coming back this way, moving just water, okay? Because the initial filtrate, remember, is mostly just the aqueous part of your blood, like your blood serum, but you need that, you know, in your blood. And so you don't want to like lose all the aqueous part of your blood. And of course you don't want to like just pee away all your body's water. So you want to conserve some water for your body's tissues. And so water reabsorption back into the blood, that's the last thing that happens. And that takes place in the distal convoluted tubule. And so you have like another arrow going. I don't know why the artist of this left that out. There's a proximal convoluted tubule, loop of Henle, and then distal convoluted tubule. You know, you would have, you know, water going back like this. And that basically what that is doing is concentrating the urine. And so at this point, you know, you're not urine yet until it's fully concentrated after the distal convoluted tubule, okay? So here, look at this again, another illustration. The corpuscle, proximal convoluted tubule, loop of Henle, distal convoluted tubule, and look, all the distal convoluted tubules connect to these ducts, which are in the pyramids, which are just simply called collecting ducts. Here I tell you, the collecting ducts receive filtrate from the distal convoluted tubule, or DCT, for transport to the renal papilla. Remember, that's the little tip, the little nipple at the tip. And that's where it's going to drip, 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 come out and be collected by the minor calyx. And so at this point, once the filtrate is in the collecting ducts or in the pyramid, it's urine. So urine formation is done. And so that's where you get urine dripping out of here. So it's just filtrate up here, but by the time it's in these ducts, it's considered urine. So that's how we make urine. Not a whole lot of chemistry and physiology involved. You'll get into that in phys next semester. But at least now you know where it's taking place. How about that? Nephron. Nephron, there you go. Now for the ureters. Now this is the best picture I at the time could find for the ureters. Just these little tubes in the back. But remember, they come from the renal pelvises that are in the sinuses. All right, and so here your background on the ureters, location between the renal pelvis and urinary bladder. Histologically, there's 3 layers. Remember, there's always 3. An adventitia, a muscularis, which is in 2 layers of muscle, and a mucosa, which I need to change this. Transitional epithelium. Oh, can I edit? I'm trying to edit. Do some editing on the fly. This PowerPoint is like, I don't know, 20 years old or older. And every semester I find something wrong with it. Because this is, my PowerPoint. It's transitional epithelium. That's true, but distally. I want to insert the word distally. Is that how you spell distally? I think so. Downstream, because closer to the kidney, it's not transitional. It's only transitional adjacent to the bladder. Anyway, so there I fixed that. It's not fixed on your PowerPoint, it's fixed on mine. So you have to fix that in your notes. So that's my out. Lisa's correct in the lecture. Distally. Transitional epithelium distally. Because remember, transitional, that's the stuff that's undergoes the transition. It looks like a squamous, a stratified squamous, and then it goes to like a stratified cuboidal and back again. It just depends on how much urine is in the bladder or not. Well, that's what I should probably just take that out altogether. But anyway, these are 3 layers. And most organs, most structures have, these 3 layers: an adventitia, a middle muscularis, and a inner mucosa. I think I don't. No, I don't really. Let me page up. The adventitia is the superficial connective tissue layer. Okay. Which fibrous connective tissue on the outside. It's like everything has that. And then the middle layer is almost always smooth muscle. And then if you have a tubular organ, like a ureter, it's a tubular organ, you usually have 2 layers of smooth muscle. You have a longitudinal layer that runs the length of the tube, and then a circular layer that goes around. And they shorten and constrict and so on and so forth. So they move stuff down there, all right? And then the inner lining would be the epithelial lining forming the mucosa. Now, I say transitional distally because the inner lining of the bladder, we're going to see, is transitional. And then some of the mucosal lining is continuous with the inner lining of the ureters. So that's what that is. Above that, up closer to the kidney, it would be like stratified cuboidal or columnar or something like that. Anyway, that's that. So termination, where the ureters come to an end, these tubes are coming down, they open up here and here. See those two little holes there? Those are the uretal openings or the uretal orifices. And so here I have termination. They open to the floor of the urinary bladder as paired uretal orifices. A full bladder compresses the ureters, thus closing them to prevent backflow. So you can, now this bladder, your bladder doesn't look like this all the time, only when it would be full. Be full, kind of expands up and then kind of rocks back and it kind of pinches these guys off to prevent backflow. That's the thing. You know, rarely, most people don't allow your bladder to get that full of urine, but that's what would happen. Most time, you have a little sense of urgency. Most people go, oh yeah, I need to go pee. You have pressure receptors, or things that detect pressure in the bladder as it's expanding. You go, oh, I gotta go pee, and so you go. But anyway, there's that. Now, speaking of the bladder, the urinary bladder, structures of it. I define it as a muscular sac on the pelvic floor, inferior to the peritoneum and posterior to the pubis. Remember, the peritoneal cavity is formed by the peritoneal sac, and it dips down into the pelvic cavity, but it doesn't go all the way down. So it would be like draped over the top of the bladder here, and then here's the pubic bones are cut away, but so it would be back behind there. Anyway, there it is. And again, likewise, there's 3 layers, tissue layers of the bladder: an adventitia, which is pretty much the same, outer connective tissue layer, kind of encapsulating the outside, and then an inner mucosal lining. Now, in the bladder, it's 3 layers making up the wall of the bladder. And the wall of the bladder, or at least the musculature of the bladder, has a name. Okay, it's called the detrusor muscle. The word detrusor means to push out. And if you tilt your head just right and squint, doesn't this look like a turkey baster bulb? This is like the bulb, the thing you squeeze to, yeah, look. So you're never going to view a turkey baster bulb the same again. But that's kind of how it functions, with the addition of that 3rd layer of muscle. You got a circular layer, a longitudinal layer, and an oblique layer. That's usually the 3rd layer is an oblique layer, but they work together to compress the bladder like this, like compressing a bulb on a turkey baster. And of course, that's to eject the urine out of the bladder. Of course, here's a big turkey baster bulb, and then there's a little turkey baster bulb there. Okay. Oh, and then again, the mucosa, which it would be 100% transitional. Now, some features associated with the bladder. You have here, I just say rugae, but your body have different types of rugae. Rugae, the word rugae means literally wrinkles. So why do you have wrinkles inside the bladder? Well, any place you have wrinkles in a mucosal lining, it's usually to allow for expansion. Like you have these wrinkles in the stomach, allow the stomach to expand. The vagina has wrinkles in it to allow it to expand. And the bladder has these little wrinkles, little rugae. And of course, allows it to expand. And that's why I tell you the rugae of the bladder are visible only in an empty bladder. Makes sense, because if the bladder's distended, the wrinkles kind of disappear. It's like the folds on an accordion. An accordion you play, you pull them out like this, they kind of disappear, but you compress it, they kind of fold out. That's what I think of. Another feature, I guess, noteworthy, I don't know why they named this and went to the trouble to put a name to it, but all books have it, and they talk about it right here, the trigon. It sounds like something really important, but it's really, the trigon is just this kind of a triangle that is formed by the 3 openings in the bladder. A right and left uretal orifice, and then the internal urethral orifice. See the 3 holes, 1, 2, 3. That's it. But I guess it's a good place to get all your holes straight and introduce a student or a reader to the terms ureteral and urethral. Okay, don't screw this up. Ureteral orifice is an opening to the ureter. Urethral is an opening to the urethra. So here's a urethra here. But you have 2 different types of urethrae. You have an internal urethral orifice and an external urethral orifice. Of course, external opens to the outside of the body here in the male and in the female here. So there's difference. Okay, volume. How much pee can you hold? Average, about 500 milliliters. A 500 milliliter beaker is about like this big, about was that a coffee cup size? I guess. Am I filled my bladder up yet? Almost. It's a little bit more in males, actually a lot more in males than in females. Females' bladder is much smaller. Why is it smaller? Well, it's crowded due to the presence of the uterus. You know, males don't have a uterus, so their bladder's can be a lot bigger. The maximum volume of a bladder, I want to pick this up. I think I got this from your book. 700 to 800 milliliters average. You can have up to 1,000 milliliters, which is a lot. And that would be very painful if you're holding your pee that much. But that's about 2 beers worth. That's about how much that is, about 2 beers in your bladder. Okay, anyway, for what that's worth. Now, the urethra, the tubes that drain the bladder, I tell you, it conveys urine out of the body. It's governed by 2 sphincters. There's the internal urethral sphincter here and here at the base of the bladder. Okay, smooth muscle, all right? And then there's the external urethral sphincter. And this is typical when you have this relationship of the internal, external. The ones that are more superficial are almost always skeletal muscle. And remember, skeletal muscle is the voluntary muscle. Smooth muscle is involuntary. And so the external urethral sphincter here and here, it's in the musculature of the what they call the urogenital diaphragm. Urogenital diaphragm is the skeletal muscle that encloses the perineum, your crotch, all right? And basically where the urethra passes through that, there's skeletal muscle that crimps closed the urethra. Why? Why do you have 2? Well, when the bladder becomes full, the internal urethral sphincter, which is smooth muscle, is normally contracted all the time. It's contracted. You don't have any control of it. It stays contracted until the bladder gets full. When the bladder gets full, it relaxes. And when it relaxes, gravity is going to take over and it's going to start to drain. But if it's not a good time to drain the bladder, like you're in class or standing in line at the bank or something like that, do people do that anymore? Does anybody go to the bank, stand in line? Or standing in line at the ticket office or waiting to go into a movie theater or whatever? Anyway, standing in line somewhere. Well, if it's not a good time to pee, you can override that. You can stop the flow. This is skeletal muscle here and here, and you can hold it, okay, for as long as you can. Anyway, that's that. Let me finish. The female urethra, obviously there's differences. See the little female urethra here to here, 3 to 4 centimeters in length from the internal urethral orifice out here to the external urethral orifice. Here it kind of shows you, well, where is that opening? Well, that's opening right here. See my red dot? Right there. Urethral orifice is the external urethral orifice there. External urethral orifice opens into the pudendovestibule. There's that word again, vestibule. Remember entryway, preceding an entryway? Pudendal means of the pudendum, which is her female genitalia. The space right here between the labia minora, that fold here, the fold there. So the space where my red dot is, my laser, that's her vestibule, that little space. And the external urethral orifice opens up into that space, anterior to the vaginal orifice. Of course, there's the opening to the vagina there. And so this is important to know because a lot of you guys are getting in, you're taking anatomy, right? You got to learn anatomy. You learn, oh yeah, I know all that, but you're going to work with people, you're going to work with patients, the public, the general lay people, and you'll be amazed on how ignorant most people are of their own anatomy. It's amazing. I tell you stories about I don't really have time for that many stories, but trust me, there's a lot of people don't realize, not a lot, but at least some, that there are separate openings for the female, one for urine and one for her vagina. And, I'll tell you about that some other time. Anyway, to the male, our big turkey baster bulb here. Where the female's urethra was about 3-4 centimeters long, the male's is about 18 centimeters long. You say, why is that so much more? Well, he has more plumbing basically to go through, right? Centimeters, not inches. I know some people are getting, oh my God, I've been cheated. No, that's centimeters. It runs from the internal urethral orifice all the way to the external urethral orifice in the male, of course, but in the male, his external urethral orifice is at the tip of the penis. Now, the male urethra, since there's more stuff that goes through, we identify different parts of it. There's 3 regions. First, the prostatic urethra. Prostatic means like of the prostate, right? At the base of the male's bladder is a prostate gland right here. And so that part of the urethra that passes through it is the prostatic urethra. It's about 2.5 inches, or 2.5 centimeters, which is about an inch in length. It's about how tall the prostate gland is. And then the little portion that goes through the external urethral sphincter or through the urogenital diaphragm, which is only about 0.5 centimeter long. That's the membranous urethra. And once you go through that, you're on the outside of the body, but males have a penis. And so attached beyond that is the penis. And so the portion of the urethra that's traveling through the penis is the penile urethra, or some books will call it the spongy urethra. Why do they call it spongy? Well, when we study the structure of the penis, when we do the reproductive system, this tissue that surrounds it is called the corpus spongiosum, which means the spongy body. So spongy urethra, penile urethra, same thing. Females don't have anything like that. Here I have it's about 13 or so centimeters long. Within the penis, surrounded by the spongy erectile tissue, the corpus spongiosum opens at the tip of the penis as the external urethral orifice. Ta-da, right there. And I think that's it. The end, we're done. How nice. We've got a couple minutes to spare. So Tuesday of next week, we start the digestive system. We'll finish that probably next week. Maybe even start the reproductive system, and the week after that, start or at least finish the reproductive system, and then we're done for the semester. That's it, folks. And then the test during finals week, yeah, after that, right? So, and we got 2 weeks left of lecture, right? Next week and the week after that. And then the week after that's finals week. And then, my gosh, we're all done with spring 2021. Okay. Well, I will see you guys next week. Have a good weekend and be good. And you know what to do if you can't be good at it.